Blockchains. Are they actually good for anything? Sometimes it feels like 90% of blockchain applications are just DeFi protocols with tokens that enable trading, leverage, and speculation on other DeFi protocols' tokens. In my opinion, this is actually one of the most valid criticisms of the crypto space as it is today. There are all these tools for speculation on prices, but where are the actual blockchain applications that are making their way into the real world? The truth is, there aren't many applications like that today. Crypto and blockchain are tools, and it just so happens that the vast majority of things that have been built with those tools have been financial applications and applications related to financial speculation. Even though I believe that those financial applications can be forces for good in the world, it's important to think about uses outside of finance that blockchain could enable. High transaction fees on blockchains like Ethereum could be one reason for the dominance of financial applications. And it makes sense because you might be willing to pay $30 to make a trade that could make you $1,000, but you wouldn't want to pay $30 to do some action in a video game. But there are a lot of exciting things on Ethereum's roadmap, including L2s and sharding, that could make those fees a thing of the past, which means that people might actually start using blockchain as a tool for other things. Just like with any new technology, it can be extremely hard to predict which applications will be the killer applications of the future, but in this video, we're going to do just that. And the way we're going to do that is by taking a look at one of Vitalik Buterin's recent blog posts. If you look back at Vitalik's writings over time, he has often been 2 to 3 years ahead of the state of the crypto industry, which means that this post about potential future blockchain applications could be a glimpse into the future 2 or 3 years from now. If you want to stay on the cutting edge of crypto and Web3 knowledge, hit the subscribe button to join us on that journey. So getting into the blog post, Vitalik has been a big proponent of non-financial applications on the blockchain for a long time.
Doing like interesting things like this that go beyond just, giving people tokens and letting people earn yield on their tokens and tokenizing the yield and earning yield on the yield tokens. This is like going beyond that has always been like part of the vision, and I think for a lot of people even the most interesting part of the vision of general purpose blockchains.
Just recently, Vitalik and 2 other collaborators published a 37-page paper on the ecosystem that could arise from soulbound or untradable tokens, which we have talked about before on this channel. That paper sparked a lot of debate on whether or not blockchain is an appropriate tool to use for some of these things. So Vitalik decided to write this post, zooming out a bit to see where blockchain could actually be useful in real-world applications. And of course, you can find the link to the post in the description. Before diving into the potential applications, Vitalik clarifies that he is not someone who sees blockchain as a tool that should be used everywhere, but he is someone that sees it used for really important things like censorship resistance, but also some less important things just out of the convenience of this tool. So the first major category of applications where Vitalik sees blockchain as a useful tool is in user account key changes and recovery. So this is kind of a within crypto application, but you could see it used in any situation where an account was not controlled by a central authority. If you need to reset your Netflix password, you just have to go through Netflix as a gatekeeper to do that. But in the case of applications where your account is not controlled by a central authority and is instead controlled by a key that you own, doing things like changing your password or your key, or doing things like recovering a stolen account could be much more difficult. But that is where the blockchain comes in as a tool. In the case of actually changing your key, it is possible to broadcast to the world that you are now using a different key by publishing a message signed with your previous key that you want to use the new key. Being authenticated with the original key means that everyone knows that whoever is asking for this new key also controlled the original key. But there is a problem with this using just standard cryptography. This means that sure, you could publish a message saying that you want to be authenticated with a new key, but if a malicious user comes in and steals your old key, they could also publish a message pointing to a different key that they control. And as you can see in the diagram that Vitalik has laid out, If you are an observer after both of these messages are published, it's impossible to know which one was actually published first. That is, unless you are using a blockchain, which provides a canonical order to all of the messages that have been published. This application of blockchain is really the main reason why they were invented in the first place, and I feel like Vitalik is including this example to set the stage for what blockchain is actually good at. If you understand this example on a deep level, it'll be easier to understand the applications laid out in the rest of this post. Then Vitalik goes on to say that getting a lost or stolen key recovered could be much harder than this original problem of changing your key. But his favorite solution to that, which he's talked about a lot, is multi-sig and social recovery. The cool thing about Vitalik's blog posts is he has a lot of references to older blog posts on different topics, and if you really want to, you can dive down the rabbit hole very, very far into his thinking. Recovering a lost or stolen key through social recovery also requires blockchain and would be a good application of it. So now let's dive into things that are a little bit less theoretical and have more application in the real world. Like, for example, a college degree. What happens if there's a situation where a student, Alice, gets a college degree, but then is found out to be cheating 6 months later? If Alice already has a degree and transcripts that she can show, she might use that degree in order to get jobs that she doesn't really deserve. So how does blockchain help with this? Some blockchain maximalists might approach this by making the degree an on-chain NFT, potentially one that could be modified by the actual university. But Vitalik points out that there's actually a more efficient way to do this, which is to make the initial degree an off-chain signed message, and in the rare case where you want to revoke a degree, put that on chain. If you wanted to do this without using the blockchain, you would have to maintain a server and a database with a list of all the students that had their degree revoked, which is obviously possible, but if there was a single blockchain source of truth for these kinds of things, then it would be a lot easier for smaller businesses and companies to do things like this. Another area that Vitalik talks about is negative reputation. In the case of positive reputation, the user has the incentive to provide proof of that positive reputation. But if you are just using authenticated messages to show that something was done, they could simply choose to only show the positive authenticated messages instead of the negative ones. But if these negative messages were actually on-chain, then it makes it easy to verify that this person is providing every message and not just the positive ones. Vitalik then goes on to talk a little bit about whether or not this negative reputation is actually a good idea. Because I think it is true that some kind of social credit or reputation system can be a dystopian nightmare that no one really wants. He does say that he supports avoiding unlimited negative reputation, but we shouldn't necessarily write it off. Uncollateralized lending already uses negative reputation, and it is something that can be done more efficiently on the blockchain. And he highlights a decentralized social media platform called Unirep Social, which benefits from using this negative reputation. And Vitalik argues that negative reputation shouldn't be completely unlimited, and there should be some way to create a new profile at some cost. But as is the case with a lot of blockchain applications, we don't know what the best negative reputation system could be, but there's this huge design space that blockchain enables. And it's very likely that there is some design of a negative reputation system that actually helps people more than it hurts. Another use case that Vitalik outlines is committing to scarcity. For example, what if you were only allowed to endorse 5 people every year on a platform like LinkedIn? It would probably make endorsements like that, or any endorsement system, a lot more valuable. So this is something that can be done very easily with the blockchain. The next example that Vitalik talks about is common knowledge, which he highlights is often important for coordination. Imagine you're in a work environment with a terrible boss. If one person was to speak out against this boss, they could get fired or punished in some way. But if everyone spoke out at once, then the company might be forced to do something. Blockchain is one tool that could be used to facilitate this kind of coordination. You could start a cryptographic commitment pool around speaking out against the boss, and people could anonymously sign up for this commitment pool. You could design this using cryptography and zero-knowledge proofs so that no one would know who is actually in the pool until a certain number of people have been reached. And then once that threshold is crossed, everyone's petition is made public and there's safety in everyone doing it at the same time. I could imagine this kind of thing being integrated into HR applications at big companies. The next thing that Vitalik talks about is interoperability with other blockchains, which really just makes sense because if you have some kind of Oracle data or source of truth, or some kind of NFT personhood, having these things on-chain so they can be shared across blockchains makes sense. One other thing that Vitalik thinks could be useful to have on-chain is open source metrics. He posted an interesting kind of thought experiment and put it as a poll on Twitter, and people seem to agree that there's some kind of value to diversity in voting. If 75% of their people had the same exact arguments and got all of their news from the same exact source, is that vote really as valuable as the 25% of people that get their news from a variety of sources and have a variety of arguments for their decision? Maybe not. But right now, we don't really have the tools we need to create these kinds of unique, diversity-focused voting systems. But blockchain could be one tool that actually enables that in the future. And it actually has already been enabled in some sense using Gitcoin grants. Because Gitcoin uses quadratic voting to disperse funds, it's possible to cheat the system by creating a lot of different accounts and then voting for the same projects. But they are actually already implementing the system that values votes that have a higher diversity more. The same thing could be used in reputation systems for things like Airbnbs or restaurants. If a big group of friends bands together and gives 5-star reviews to all of the Airbnbs within that group, you could have those ratings be less valuable than someone who gets 5-star ratings from a wide variety of people. By having those different ratings on the blockchain, you'd have a public history from which to work with to build these systems. There are some critics of this quantitative reputation system, like Kate Sills, because it does feel weird to have things like reputation governed by numbers. But Vitalik points out that because subjective analysis doesn't really scale far beyond Dunbar's number, which is the number of people that you can know, in order to have high-functioning societies at a large scale, this kind of quantitative reputation is useful. But we do have to be careful with it. So Vitalik poses some standards like intersubjectivity, credible neutrality, and openness in order to make this kind of reputation system less dangerous. And finally, Vitalik saves a somewhat controversial take for last, having blockchain being used as a data store. One of the main problems with blockchain as a technology is that currently you need a history of every single thing that has happened on every single node, which has already become prohibitive in a lot of cases to run your own node. So storing unnecessary data on a blockchain is generally frowned upon, but Vitalik argues that there are some cases where it could be useful. One example he talks about is social metadata. Imagine if you had some kind of short bio, like your Twitter bio, that automatically populated every time you used a new platform. One way to make that data available to build on top of is to store it on a blockchain. And this is actually what Lens protocol is already doing. They are a protocol that serves as a base layer for social networks to be built on top of them. If you want to follow me on Lenster, which is an application that's using Lens, I'll drop my handle below. But back to the post, out of everything, Vitalik says that he's most confident about interoperability with other blockchains and the account management tools that blockchain would enable. Things like negative reputation are super early stage, but they could be really useful, and it's really hard to predict how we could design them. He talks about the open source metrics and common knowledge games to be very early stage ideas, which they are, but to me, they're some of my favorites. Of course, because some of these things are so early stage, it's impossible to predict exactly how these systems will manifest in the future. But I do think it is true that blockchain enables such a wide variety of applications that we will see non-financial applications within the next few years. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.